Good evening, everyone. Only an hour left, or so, even under now, of transfer deadline day. And then we can all relax after a really busy summer for Norwich City. I don't think it's been maybe the most exciting deadline day, but could that change over the next 57 minutes or so? No, probably not. But we are going to take a look at everything that's unfolded so far, look at the transfer window sort of overall and give you our reflections, talk a little bit about what we've made and give you the latest just in case anything does change, because of course we wouldn't want to completely rule anything out at this stage, given all the things that can change and the panic that can set in for various clubs. But the position at Norwich City very much is that it's looking like it might be quite a quiet ending to the window. So, Connor, I'll start with how you are. It's not really been the sort of window or the sort of deadline day that's tested us as journalists, really, is it?
No, which is quite nice because I go back to January and we had a late one with Jacob Wright that I don't think any of us saw coming at the start of the day, and then I go back to 2 years ago, of course, which I think almost we know it makes us twitch, doesn't it, when we think about that one when it was Yuzhou Huang and Danny Bart very very late. So yeah, I mean, not I don't want to turn anyone off at this stage right at the beginning of the broadcast, but yeah, we're not expecting a busy last 55 minutes in terms of incoming senior wise. I think Norwich City are done. The only incoming now will be whether or not they can get Zach Bauman from Manchester United, who would be a signing for the development squad, over the line in the next 55 minutes. And last time I checked in, that was hopeful but not definite at this stage. So we'll see on that one. And I don't really expect any senior outgoings. The only sort of thing I could see getting confirmed, again, as things stand, things get desperate in the last hour, so you're never quite sure. But again, we're probably expecting Dan Barden to Dagenham Redbridge on loan to be probably the peak of what we're going to get in the next hour or so. So those are the two really that we're waiting on. And certainly in terms of a senior level, Shane Duffy, Anis Ben Slimani, for reasons that we'll get into, that could rumble on in the next couple of weeks or so. But yeah, as things stand in the last hour, we're expecting a very, very, very quiet one, which I know doesn't make for great viewing, but we're going to get into individual players and speak about different things. So hopefully you guys stick around and at least keep us company to prevent us just having a conversation with ourselves for the next however long we manage to fill until obviously that deadline becomes closer.
Most definitely, and I think although we've talked about maybe not the most exciting deadline day ever, probably for a lot of people that will do them just fine, because I think when everyone woke up in the morning, obviously we'd reported that it looked very unlikely that Josh Sargent was going to leave the club at this late stage of the window. Liam Manning kind of repeated that message both in his Q&A with you really for the Canaries Trust and in his post Blackburn press conference. So it didn't look particularly likely, but I think when we all woke up and at 8 a.m, there were already links with Sunderland and that speculation had started to go again. I think a lot of the nerves were jangling a little bit, but at this stage, he's out in America, 50 minutes or so left of the window. It does feel very, very, very unlikely at this stage that he goes. And I think Liam Winnell is I've lost the comment I was going for. There we are. Jason Zimmerman is probably along the same lines as a lot of Norwich fans when he says keeping Sarge is the best boring deadline day imaginable. Does that feel like, Connor, the thing that they needed to do and the main win from today's events, if you can call them them?
Yeah, I've been reluctant probably all summer, and I think we recorded videos like this in July and in June, and at that stage, I'd have said pretty confidently that I'd have been amazed, and I think I did say I'd be amazed if Josh Sargent was still a Norwich City player come the end of the window. And I think even in the last week or so, where it's felt a little bit more, there's been a little bit more confidence that he'll still be around. This is the first time really definitively that I'm going to say it, and I don't think I'll look silly in the next however long, 43 minutes or 53 minutes or whatever it is, but yeah, Josh Sargent will be a Norwich City player beyond the deadline. And, park any of the business, the 12 senior additions they've made. I think if you'd offered anyone that at the start of the window, irrespective of anything else, irrespective of any other business, of any other players coming in, I think most Norwich City fans would have absolutely bitten your hand off for that. And I think in truth, really, beyond that Wolfsburg splurge, and I know that, as you said, there was some Sunderland stuff, and I think they probably did have a knock at the door. I'm not sure Norwich City really answered that. But I think since the season started, it's felt incredibly unlikely that he was going to go anywhere, both on his side in terms of pushing anything, but equally from Norwich's side as well, because of how important he is. And I think the club have been really conscious of probably what the message it sends out if you sell Josh Sargent at a really late stage of the window. And, let's have it right. A month ago, when it was maybe not August, but certainly July, I think Norwich would have done business, and very nearly did with Wolfsburg. That got very, very close to the point where the clubs and the fee was broadly agreed. It was only Josh Sargent who didn't want that move. Beyond that, really, there's not been too much. I know Burnley had a nibble, but at a low level and in a very extravagantly structured deal. Leeds, again, that was kind of, they were talking, but there was never really anything substantial on the table. So, yeah, it's probably felt like there's been more noise than substance around Josh Sargent. And, I'll say it now because I'm 99.9% confident that he'll be a Norwich City player in the next hour. But I find it remarkable that he's still here in terms of the quality that he has. And, similarly to Gabriel Sara, it just feels a little bit lazy to me. And I've said this a few times. I've not done it because I want him to go. Saying it, I'm surprised really that, in today's game when, a month ago, £20 million, you look at the money that is being spent in the Premier League even today, that doesn't seem like a really vast sum of money, even taking into account obviously his injury record and whatnot, and maybe his unproven nature at the top level. I just can't believe nobody's taken a gamble on him. But hey, who cares? Norwich City will be the beneficiaries of that. And I think we've seen from the start of the season that he's had, and this is the way I would describe it really, it feels like with him at Norwich City, anything's possible. Without him at Norwich City, it didn't really feel like anything was possible. And I think those are the margins that we're talking about. So yeah, a massive, massive boost if, as we expect in 50 minutes time, the window closes and Josh Sargent is, as we expect, still a Norwich City player. I think that will be Norwich City's best bit of business that they've done this summer. We'll be keeping him, not really for anything they've done, but it's a massive boost to Liam Manning's side. And of course, the fan base out there as well, because, a few days ago we were talking about another sale. Well, actually, and this is a question I'd ask maybe to the people watching this, and they can reply, and I'll ask it to you as well. I think if you'd have offered, or if I'd have offered you, well, you're going to lose Sainz, you're going to lose Marcelino Nunez, forget where he's gone to, but you're going to lose those two, but you get to keep Josh Sargent. Would you have taken that?
Well, I think I would have done from a Norwich perspective, although you've cleverly said, disregard who Nunez went to, which I think is probably the important part. I think if you went into the window and you completely omitted that and you told people the way that it was going to pan out, they would have been delighted, because I think going into it, probably we'd said a few times it looked fairly likely that actually all three of them would go. To me, I thought Sainz and Sargent were almost nailed on to leave the club, really. So I think if you had offered most people, as you say, the chance to keep Sargent at the expense of losing Nunez and Sainz, then they probably would have taken that deal, especially when you look at some of the deals that they've done. Obviously, Sainz went out and they replaced him with a couple of players probably in that area, really. Obviously, Matthias Kvistgaard, not really exactly the same type of player or exactly the same position as Sainz, but can sort of cover that area. Papa Amadou Diallo, maybe the more of a direct replacement for the role that he can play. So I think they've done relatively well replacing that position. Pelle Madsen and how well he comes in for Nunez obviously remains to be seen, because we haven't yet seen him in a Norwich shirt. But yeah, I think if you had offered people that deal, then they probably would have snapped your hand off. And for anyone who possibly needed any sort of reminder whatsoever as to how important Josh Sargent is to this team, 6 goals in the first 5 games. I mean, that's probably his best start ever in a season, probably in his career, but certainly in a Norwich shirt. And when that speculation started going this morning, there obviously would have been a few people getting quite nervous. But I think when you looked at that Nunez sale, probably the feeling around the team and the fact that you look at those performances that they've produced, I don't think you could look at any of them and say, it's likely that they could really compete for the playoffs, to be honest, or compete for promotion without him in the team. So I think it is really important to keep him. And as you say, I think at this stage of the window, I'm really relatively happy to say that he will be a Norwich player beyond that deadline at 7 p.m. So yeah, certainly that's one of the positive developments today. A couple of other interesting sort of bits, and the comments are flying in so quickly now that I can't really highlight the questions. But one of the names that's been circling around sort of Norwich City in the last few hours is Kenny McLean. As I think you say, almost as a trademark, it's not a summer until Kenny McLean's been linked with Rangers. Those first links came, I think, on Sunday, were the first sort of proper links, and some repeats of those today, suggesting that Rangers were keen to move for McLean, given their poor start to the season and some of their midfield issues. But to me, certainly, it doesn't feel like it was ever particularly close. I think, having spoken to Kenny a couple of weeks ago, he seemed like somebody who was very committed. You look at his performances, and although not on the same scale, of course, I don't think Norwich would ever have got the money really to make it worth it to them to sell him at this stage of the window. But you've been speaking to people at the club throughout the day, Connor. Was that ever as close as maybe some of the reports suggested? Was Kenny McLean ever in with a chance of leaving the club this deadline day?
Yeah, I'm surprised it's taken this long, really, for Kenny to get linked with Rangers. But I guess maybe the injury quashed that. I think it was. And again, we were speaking to people yesterday when this broke. And I think there was probably an element of surprise to an extent that this had come out. Obviously, Liam Manning was asked about it Saturday post game, which felt a little bit random, to be honest, because there were no real whispers before that. And there was absolutely nothing in that. There was no contact. Norwich didn't receive a bid or an offer or an inquiry or any conversation from anybody. So I think I don't know who was pushing that, on whose side, and where it came from. Maybe Rangers. I think they've signed a midfielder today, or in the process of signing a midfielder from Marseille. So you never know if these things are put out there to try and move other things along. There's games within games that get played, but I don't think there was ever really any doubt that Kenny McLean was going to stay at Norwich City. Again, at this late stage, you've got to take into consideration it's not just authorising the sale of a player, it's then going in and replacing them. And Norwich at this stage just didn't really want to do that with Kenny McLean. He's someone Liam Manning likes. He's a big character, club captain, key in terms of leadership, part of the kind of playing element. There's a lot of stuff that we and people don't see behind the scenes that he does, which is positive, and that drives the team forward. He's really, really useful for coaches in terms of the way that he plays. And I thought on Saturday as well, played really well actually in that game against Blackburn, and helped with a lot of that balance that we spoke about. So I don't think it was ever really a serious proposition. It's a good bit of fun though. I'll put it in my bingo card for next year, although technically he's had a contract, but there's an option there, isn't there? So I think maybe in January we'll get Kenny to Rangers again. I think every single window that I've been in this job, we've had that in some degree, and in definitely every summer transfer window, if not some January ones. It felt like last summer was probably the closest that we got to that actually being something tangible. But like Josh Sargent, he'll be an Norwich City player beyond the deadline, and again, I think that's a massive boost for them, and we know how important he is, and how he drives things. And even if it maybe isn't in the frontline role, not to say it isn't, it may well be, because we know how important he is. But if it isn't in that frontline role that maybe he's had, you still know that he's a good egg around the group, and he's going to be so important to the overall dynamic of it. So huge boost for Norwich City that Sargent, McLean are both going to be Norwich City players beyond the deadline. I spoke to Ben Krezene on Saturday after the game at Ewood Park, and he spoke around the Nunez stuff in terms of those two being so pivotal in speaking to the group and driving those standards. And I think it shows you just how they've grown in terms of their personality. And that's the point maybe I missed on Josh Sargent that I would raise. I think we've seen today and throughout the window some very high profile, not just Norwich, of players maybe who haven't got their own way and who have taken that to different levels to try and force a move through, refusing to play and doing all that thing. But actually Josh Sargent has remained committed, loyal, and goal scoring, had that goal scoring prowess. And I think we saw it on Saturday when he was pounding the badge on his chest. It almost felt very pointed in terms of a message. So Yeah, it's hugely positive, and I'm sure Liam Manning. Well, I know he's going to be delighted the window is going to be closed in 40 minutes' time, but equally he's going to be very happy that he's got those two at his disposal, because there's no doubt Norwich City are a significantly stronger side with those two in it. And I always say to you guys, it feels like sometimes there's two solutions to every problem in football. You either sign a player or sack a manager, but actually, I think this is proof that keeping hold on what you got actually sometimes can be the most important thing. And yeah, those two in a Norwich City Championship side, I think with those two in it, we would say that Norwich City have got a chance of doing something this year, and that's a positive place to exit the transfer window in, irrespective of perhaps what the last week has been in terms of noise.
Yeah, you mentioned there that McLean, as it stands, will be out of contract next summer, and of course that gives us a fantastic avenue into January speculation about a potential move to Rangers, because of course he could sign a pre-contract agreement, but right now it feels likely to me that he'll continue to play quite a key role for Norwich going forward. And I think that kind of brings me to the reason why I never thought, even if it had come up earlier in the window, it was likely to happen. And that's because you look at his importance to this Norwich team. As you said, we saw it outlined very clearly on Saturday. You see it on the pitch, where I think probably everyone does this, but I'll admit to my role in it, I kind of forgot how good he can be sometimes on the ball a little bit, and the positions that he takes up. I think because he's older and because he's got that leadership role, sometimes it's easy to almost slip yourself into those cliches that that's all he offers, and that he's kind of a hard worker and nothing more. But he does actually bring a lot of tactical, technical quality to that team that I think they'd struggle to replace. But when you consider the fact that he's a 33-year-old in the last year of his contract, I don't think you would ever receive any sort of fee with which you could go and replace him. And probably that, for me, is the difference with the Sargent situation, where even if there is interest, if they'd sold Sargent, for example, and got £22 million as the Wolfsburg package was sort of around, you'd back them, or they'd certainly back themselves to go and sign someone as good, or at least nearly as good as Sargent, with that money, and probably about half of that money as well. But with McLean and the fee that he would command, I don't see how Norwich, in the here and now, and obviously we know about the long term and the fact that Ben Napper wants as young a squad as he can while still winning. But in the short term, I don't see how it's possible to sign a player as good as Kenny McLean for what Norwich would receive, given his sort of market value. So when you look at that, Connor, was that kind of a big factor in why Norwich maybe wouldn't want to sell him? Because you're ultimately, as a club, never going to receive, he's not worth to anyone else what he's worth to Norwich.
Yeah, completely that. And again, I think it's the bits that people don't see often, that ability to lead a dressing room, to command the dressing room, and to have the respect of it as well, I think is a really big element that we don't get to see on a daily basis. That used to kind of be told to me in terms of Grant Hanley, which is people might have a view in terms of how he is as a footballer, but actually as a captain, he was really well respected, did a fantastic job in kind of leading that and championing the players as well internally, which is a big thing. And the fact that Norwich have Kenny on the pitch for the footballing reasons that you outlined is big, and I think he adds that balance and versatility. It was interesting when I asked Liam Manning at that Canaries Trust event last week about whether Norwich had enough creativity, which is kind of the point that fans have been discussing in those midfield areas. He pointed to him, and there were some stats going around the Nunez stuff, wasn't there, in terms of how maybe he'd achieved better in terms of assists and maybe the stats that we associate with that. So yeah, he's a big player, and like you say, I think it is easy to underestimate him, and it certainly was this summer. He had a difficult season last year with suspensions and injuries, and some of that was his own doing in terms of his discipline. But by the same token, when he comes in, and the year before that was so important to that David Wagner side, and I think this year again, and there's a reason why since he's been there, every single coach has pushed him forward as a really prominent player. There's a reason they do that, for footballing wise and kind of character wise. And as well, what I would say is, in a week where maybe a lot of fans have questioned, do those players get it? Do they know what it means to play for Norwich City? Do they know what it means to represent this football club? He absolutely does. And I think he's very keen on not just showing that in terms of the way that he plays, but also sharing that message with the group, as is Josh Sargent, to be fair. So I think you're right in terms of what Norwich would get for him elsewhere at this stage of his contract, of his career. He offers them a far greater value than what they would get. And, it's not like, we're sitting here talking about a player that cost them a load of money. They've got value out of Kenny McLean. I think we look at things sometimes through a purely financial lens, but equally it's what players give and the value they offer whilst they're here. And I think throughout his time, if it ended tomorrow, what a career, what an impact Kenny McLean has had. And it's a young midfield group as well. And you've got to think as well, Mirko Topic, as good as he's been coming into the group and in those 4 or 5 games since joining Norwich City, new to the Championship. Pella Matson, new to the Championship. Liam Gibbs, still very young and has had kind of those issues with injury. Who else am I missing? Jacob Wright, very, very young and not played a lot of senior football. If we're talking as those 4 alongside Kenny McLean as your midfield pack, I think it just epitomises the role that he has in providing a little bit of balance, experience and helping those guys who maybe don't have experience of the Championship, but also are maybe slightly more inexperienced and trying to find their way a little bit. And sometimes he can be the glue to do that. And look, the long term, I think we're all aware, probably feels like it's Topic and Matson, but to have Kenny McLean in and around that group is so key. And to have him, beyond that, and of course there's an option on it as well. I think he's almost become. It feels like he's been on a bit of a journey in terms of how he's perceived, Kenny, and I feel like it has gone up and down. But actually, I think he's been very, very consistent, and for where Norwich City are, he's a fantastic player at the level. And Liam Manning summed it up perfectly, which is when he was Bristol City manager. If Kenny McLean was in the Norwich team or wasn't in the Norwich team, he'd be really pleased. And I think that's probably a sentiment echoed across the Championship. So, yeah, he's away with Scotland. Hopefully, he can manage that ankle and those fitness and come back the other side, because Norwich City are going to need him, I think. And it displayed his importance on Saturday for me with that performance. So, yeah, good news all round.
Absolutely. What I found interesting when you listed those midfielders who McLean maybe can play a little bit of a mentorship role for and can provide an example for was the main one who you left out, and that's Anis Ben Slimane. Obviously, that situation's still kind of ongoing. A lot of people will look at it and say there are 36 minutes left of the transfer window. Liam Manning has no plans for him or for Shane Duffy, and they'll wonder maybe why it is that those players haven't left the club yet. Now, obviously, what we're led to believe is that there's interest from Turkey in both of those players. I think there's been Championship interest as well, mainly in Duffy. We know that Wrexham and West Brom have had an interest at various points in the summer. Wrexham probably a few weeks ago, West Brom a little bit more recently before they signed Chris Mepham from Bournemouth. But yeah, as I said, 35 minutes left now of the transfer window. Slimane and Duffy aren't part of Liam Manning's plans. So bring us up to date on that, Connor, and why maybe it isn't that they'll be at Carrow Road until January just because they're currently still Norwich players.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think there's been a couple of bits that have popped up today that maybe haven't made sense for either club or player. So I don't think it's like it's been completely quiet and nobody wants them. It's of course got to be the right one for them and their careers. And I don't think that's quite happened. Like you say, domestic window shuts at 7 o'clock today. Actually, the Scottish window is a little bit later than that. It's 11 o'clock. So not to completely dampen the whole segment we've just done on Kenny McLean, because I don't see a world in which the window closes after 7 and Norwich then sanction a move. But for those two, potentially, that is an example of an option that maybe would give beyond the window that we're living in and talking about. But the biggest one you mentioned is that Turkish interest, and that is very real. I won't try and pronounce the club's name. I have tweeted it out, but they're towards the bottom of the Turkish league. It begins with K, but they've been linked with Shane Duffy. Slimane's been linked with Trabzonspor as well, and their window doesn't close until September the 11th or 12th, I think. So there's a possibility that even though the kind of domestic window is going to close in the next half an hour, that doesn't automatically mean that those two guys are definitively Norwich City players. Of course, there are other routes as well if Norwich was to explore it in terms of mutual terminations and stuff like that. I don't think we would get to that stage. And I know that there is a perception out there of Shane Duffy, and he's done some really stupid things as an individual during his time at Norwich City, but actually he is quite popular inside the building, and he is somebody who I think isn't going to upset or kind of rock the boat or cause any trouble, certainly in terms of playing, whilst he's in that squad. So, and I have to say, and I've said this a few times, you can only take people as you find them. Every time I've spoken to Shane Duffy, I've found him to be really pleasant, really professional, and he's always spoken really well about the club and the group. And actually as well, if you see, he's been at every single home game, basically sitting pretty much next to Liam Manning in that dugout bit. Obviously, they're separate, and he's been really animated in terms of the team. So I think it shows that care is still there. It's just probably Norwich have moved on in terms of their defensive elements, and of course January will be another option if nothing does arrive from that sort of Turkish interest. And Slimani as well, I think you've got to feel a little bit sorry for him. He came to Norwich permanently in January and has probably been the victim of the managerial change, because he was somebody that did fit into the way Johannes Torp wanted to play, slightly lower tempo, more possession based, wanted to get on the ball in terms of how Manning wants to play and getting after teams and being a bit more energetic, just not his game. And he's probably fallen victim to that. So it would be good if both of those guys, for their own sake, could get themselves sorted out. I think for their own careers, particularly Shane Duffy, where he's at in his life, and obviously where he's at in his career as well. He needs to be playing games. It doesn't serve him to sit on the bench for 4 months until the next transfer window opens. So let's see if anything arises of that Turkish move. Again, that window closes on the 12th of September. So they've got still couple of weeks or just under a couple of weeks to sort themselves out if that's the route they want to go down. So watch this space. Just because they haven't or aren't going to leave, we don't expect in the next half an hour. That doesn't mean that they're set to stay at Norwich City for the entirety of until the next transfer window opens in January.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you mentioned, in terms of Duffy and why maybe it's important for this stage of his career to get a move and to make sure that he's playing as many games as he possibly can, probably earning as much money as he possibly can going into the end of his career as well. I think for Slimani, you look at the way that the last few years of his career have certainly played out. I think this will be, if he finds a new club, a fourth club in 4 seasons. He's at sort of prime age as well. So for his career and for any chances and ambitions that he has, I'm sure, of going on to play at the top level, you'd think that probably he does need to be settling down somewhere and getting a real run of consistent games somewhere quite soon. So I think it suits both of those players probably to get a move as quickly as possible. And I'd say, and Connor, you might correct me, but to me it feels likely that with this Turkish window open for as long as it is now, I would probably expect that both of those do manage to find the moves and that they do get the minutes elsewhere. But a lot of what people will look at, particularly with the Slimani situation, is the fact that actually Norwich could have deferred the opportunity to sign him until this summer. They obviously decided to make it permanent early back in January for around £1.2 million from Sheffield United. Obviously, initially he signed on a season-long loan. Norwich could have waited until the summer before making a slightly more informed decision, but they made the decision earlier to kind of help Slimani settle in, and maybe for some of those more intangible elements for him as a player to kind of help him in his Norwich career. But a lot of people will now look at it and they'll say Johannes Torp was sacked 3 months later. Norwich probably won't make back as much money as they would have done, or they won't make back the fee that they've paid to sign him permanently from Sheffield United. So do you think Norwich will look back at that, particularly Ben Napper will look back at that with a little bit of regret that they made that deal permanent then when they could have waited and maybe it wouldn't have been done this summer? Or do you think they'll look back and say there were reasons why they did it? Ultimately, that's football and that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think the fee as well, like it was, what was it, one and a half? It was. Exactly. So I mean, again, in modern football and where they're at, they are not in the place they were in terms of, you get a deal like that wrong and it not puts you in loads of trouble, but obviously you're then trying to have to offset it with something else. So I don't think it's the end of the world. It's a shame really for the player, and like I said, I don't think it's anything that he's done. It's not reflective of him, because I think we saw some good bits, particularly when he was on loan at the start of his Norwich City spell. There were some really good bits, and as a squad player, I don't think he's the worst option. He's been good for the likes of Oscar Schwartau in his first year in England. And again, some off-pitch stuff that people don't see in terms of that Danish contingent. I know he's a Tunisian international, but clearly he's Copenhagen born, so understands culturally what those guys are going through. And look, just a shame. And like you say, sometimes people are victims of circumstance, right? And I think that's probably where he is. Look, who knows? It only takes a few injuries and suddenly you can be in the picture and you can force your way back in. I didn't think he had the best pre-season. clearly fitness-wise has been a little bit of a concern as well. He's not quite looked the same for me since that injury he got at Luton, which was, I think, just after or just before they activated that permanent deal. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things. When Norwich pushed a button, they were expecting Yannis Torup to stay at the club for the 3-year tenure, and he would have been a more pivotal part of that squad, albeit I don't think a frontline one. So, yeah, again, I think he's a good guy. I don't think he's one. If he stays around, he'll go. But I think, as Martin comments there, to be fair, you can't get on the right side of every deal, and even for all of the extensive work that you do on deals and research and data stuff, it goes to show that actually a couple of things change and move and personnel change, and suddenly you can go from maybe being quite frontline to down the pecking order pretty quickly. And as well, I think it's probably reflective of, again, it's maybe gone under the radar a bit, but a little bit of what Liam Gibbs has done over pre-season. And we just spoke about Kenny McLean, the fact that he did it under Torup, he did it under Wagner. I know Wagner is probably a different debate in that he didn't play in maybe the position that we would have expected him to a lot of the time, but he's always kind of been in favour with coaches, and they've all seen something in him. And I thought he had a really good cameo. It was only small and it was short, but it was quite influential to helping Norwich just wrestle back a little bit of control at Blackburn on Saturday. I felt so. I think it's as much a nod to Liam Gibbs as it is maybe a bash on Anis Ben Slimani, and we'll see how it unfolds obviously in the next couple of weeks. But for the reasons we spoke about, I think it would make sense for both of those guys to try and get themselves sorted. If it's Turkey or anything else, I think Norwich would be pretty open to most things from here if those players could find themselves an opportunity elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely, and I think you're right to point out that midfield situation, and ultimately you look at the way that it was last season. Yes, they had injury issues, and that kind of exposed the midfield a little bit. But I think there was one stage in the summer we were looking at it saying they had 9 midfield options, which obviously you can't carry and keep everyone happy, and you can't have the kind of smaller competitive squad that both Liam Manning likes, as he showed at Bristol City, and also that kind of can help academy talent come through. I think if you have 9 midfielders in there, which academy midfielder is ever going to have any chance of coming through and making that breakthrough when maybe there is a sort of injury situation or something like that? Do you ever have a Gabe Forsyth, as we saw breakthrough under Torup, come through if there continues to be that density of midfielders? So yeah, I think you're right to highlight Gibbs, and probably it is a situation where, unfortunately, if they do slim that midfield group, which I think they had to do when they came in the summer, some people have to lose out, and that's probably where things are with Slimani. So yeah, as you said, it will be interesting to see how things unfold from here. But that Turkish interest is very real. I think Trabzonspor, the club, linked with Slimani, and they've now got 11 days still left to do it. So even if there are a couple of twists and turns, and obviously it will take a little bit of work to get that over the line, it does feel like maybe Turkey is next for Slimani. But we've had a question from Toby, which I think probably we've been asked a few times today, and it's another thread that actually has run through deadline day. Probably a slight surprise for me that it's become as tangible as it has. Obviously, we saw some links earlier in the summer, but Toby's question is, what's the latest on Kellum Fisher, who today was linked quite heavily with Everton? I think there were some reports earlier in the summer, along with Nottingham Forest. So clearly Premier League clubs have been watching Kellum Fisher. We're led to believe that they have. And also that actually there was a little bit of interest in Everton, but it doesn't seem like, based on where it was earlier in the day and some of the reporting that there was, that it might actually turn into a move, and that it looked like Kellum Fisher could be maybe the likeliest for a real change and a real event late in deadline day, as we've kind of lacked, and as Norwich have lacked today. Obviously not much tangible development in that over the last few hours. So Connor, bring us up to date on that and what the situation is with Kellum Fisher.
Yeah, sure. Again, something that's rumbled on. Like you said, there were links earlier in the window, weren't there? I don't know how kind of seriously, but again, Everton like him, and they're not the only Premier League club that like him. And let's be honest, based off what he did last season, why wouldn't they? And why wouldn't Premier League teams be be looking at him because he's a young English player who played a lot of championship games and was consistent and did well. He was second in Norwich City's Player of the Season campaign. So yeah, even though it's maybe not been the start to the season that he would like, and again I think there's maybe mitigation behind that in terms of the pre-season that he had. He obviously had that hamstring injury that prevented him from really getting minutes, so he's probably alongside a few of these Norwich players that are just getting up to speed. And I think again we saw that probably come into effect at Portsmouth where he struggled, but there's been good games. I thought he was pretty good on Saturday without being spectacular. I thought he was really good at Watford. So yeah, maybe just indicative of where he's at, that his performances haven't quite been there. So yeah, not probably a huge surprise that there's Premier League interest, but yeah, a little bit surprised that this has maybe come up as much as it has today. It wasn't really something that I was anticipating. Again, I know there's been murmurs. I haven't covered it too much, but I think Everton are pretty close to, or in the process, or trying to sign another right back. I think so. Clearly, they're in the market for one, and what I would imagine is Fisher's a name that's been on their list all summer, and it's probably one that maybe has just been pushed out there to try and get this one over the line and speed it along. So yeah, certainly from Norwich's perspective, they haven't had any club-to-club contact, be that from Everton or anyone else for Callum Fisher this window. I think they'd be reluctant to lose him because of the quality that he has. But yeah, again, as with every player and as is their model, I think if the fee was right, then they probably would have done. And could I have seen a world, theoretically, again, I'm not saying this would have happened, but if Everton would have come in and said, look, we want to buy him, but we'll let you have him on loan for the rest of the season, I could have seen maybe Norwich being amenable to something like that if the fee was right. But that never materialized. There was never any bids, never any offers, never any conversations. I think it's just that awareness that there's interest in him and that he's been scouted by some top level clubs. And again, why wouldn't he? He's going away with the England under 21s over this break with Ben Krasene as well, who looks to have got kind of a late call up. So that's good news that Norwich's two fullbacks are being selected at a level, because it means they've got high potential and people kind of outside of Norfolk see that. So yeah, it's ultimately good news for what they want to do, and he's a really good player. Very different to Jack Stacey, and I don't want to go down that road because I think they're kind of horses for courses. But yeah, it's good again that Norwich are able to keep him, and I actually think for where his career is at, another year at Norwich is probably the best for him right now, I would say, despite maybe those Premier League glances to him. And again, I suspect this is probably not the last we'll be speaking about Callum Fisher and Everton, but probably Callum Fisher and Premier League clubs more broadly.
Yeah, I agree, and that was kind of what I was going to come on to. I think you outlined the possibility of maybe a permanent deal and then a loan back, as obviously we've seen Norwich do with a few players previously when they've been in the Premier League. And for me, that would have made most sense for everyone, really, if they could have got that deal over the line. I think probably for Fisher, although he has shown a lot of promise, and clearly for somebody they plucked out of non-league for a six-figure sum, he's been an absolutely unbelievable signing, and certainly grown into that role that he's got, particularly under Johannes Torup last season. Has a bit of an opportunity with Jack Stacey now out injured, and although he'll probably come back after the international break, I actually thought Fisher was pretty good against Blackburn. Did a lot of the battling that you probably expect in that sort of away game when it's raining and you're in Lancashire. I think he coped quite well with that side of the game and offered them a lot. But as you said, I think at this stage in his career, there are definitely worse things for him than staying at Norwich for another year. Now, at one stage in the day, it looked like it was at least a possibility that would be on loan, and then maybe he would be asked to step up to the Premier League. But ultimately, when you look at his talent, if he fulfills his talent and if he fulfills that potential that I think we and all of the head coaches he's had have spoken about, then he will be bound for the Premier League at some point, and he doesn't really need to worry about that. So as long as he's focused on his development and he continues to kind of continues on that upward trajectory that we've seen so far in yellow and green, I think probably, as you said, those links will resurface and maybe the move happens in another way in a different point in time. But certainly interesting that became a kind of theme of the day, because for me, although we did see those links and we did know that Premier League clubs had watched Callum Fisher, I was surprised that it was this advanced. I say advanced, that it was really a tangible possibility at this stage of the window. But again, with 18 minutes left of the window, that's probably one to follow maybe in future windows and future discussions. one theme that's come up in the comments over the last few minutes is about Adam Eder, who's joined Swansea from Celtic. Abu Kamara in a similar boat. I think he's also joined Swansea, obviously from Hull, Swansea have kind of hijacked a deal when it looked like he was going to Getafe, and there was talk of maybe a registration issue there. So I'd have to double check the statuses of both of those moves. But the main question from Norwich fans, as you can imagine, as Keenan has asked, is about a sell-on clause. Now, this is actually one where it might be slightly different from player to player. So almost every transfer, almost every transfer has a sell-on clause. So when you read that there's a sell-on clause, that's not really a surprise anymore. But secondly, almost all of those sell-on clauses, the large majority, are based on profit. So the club who sold the player in the first place won't see any extra cash unless the club they sold them to then goes on to sell them for a profit themselves. Obviously, that was the case with Jonathan Rowe earlier in the summer. Marseille made more money than they had paid Norwich for Jonathan Rowe. So Norwich received around £850,000 as part of that deal. But with Eder, I think the situation is, from what I've read, that the fee is around 7 million. And when you consider that Celtic paid an initial £8.5 million plus add-ons for Adam Eder, that means that that obviously you expect Norwich won't see any of that unless it was a very, very rare deal in terms of the sell-on fee included in that. But I think from what I've seen, Abu Kamara is set to cost Swansea around 6 million when Norwich sold him to 5 million. So sold him to Hull for 5 million. So would you expect, Connor, that would include at least some kind of fee? I mean, when you're looking at that type of profit, you wouldn't expect it to be world changing for Norwich, particularly in the kind of financial situation they're in at the moment. But would you say that should entail at least some sort of windfall for Norwich if that deal does go through or has gone through?
Yeah, it would be a small one, wouldn't it? In that case, and I think the other one I would raise is Alex Matos as well, because they definitely had a sell on in that, and he's joined Sheffield United. Obviously, went to Chelsea on a free transfer. Look, there are examples where clubs sometimes can just pay cash to ensure that doesn't become responsible or that doesn't become active in deals. I'm not aware of Chelsea doing that. Whilst Alex Matos has been on their books, he's gone to Sheffield United for 1.3 million. So again, that's something we'll have to chase up post window to see if Norwich City are going to get any benefit of that. But I would imagine there'd be, again, a very nominal fee. Clearly, they got the 850-ish for John Rowe when he made the move to Bologna as well. So you add all of that up. Let's say theoretically, if Kamara goes to Swansea and those figures are correct, and they get a windfall, and they get a windfall from Matos and Rowe as well, that's an extra £1 million that Norwich have made by not doing anything. And we talk about often selling players, and actually this is the bit and this is the element that Norwich have got good at, I think, in recent years. When you look at someone like James Maddison, when they got a big windfall from him when he went from Leicester to Tottenham, they got a decent sum there. And if you can continue to do that, that's a good way of just ticking over. And £1 million, that's a decent chunk of money that you can put into your academy, or you can do something with in terms of infrastructure that you don't plan for or foresee. So that's again really good business. And even with the Matos deal, there was a lot of frustration, I know, internally that they weren't able to get him on a new deal, and it was a difficult process. But ultimately, if they've got money for him now and it's a good sum, and again, we don't know at this stage, then that would be really positive. The Adam Eder one I find a bit strange that he's left Celtic that quickly if that Swansea move does go through, because I know he hasn't been the most popular there, but I do think there's a good striker in there. And again, I think he's not that I want to make this a massive detour to Adam Eder, but I almost think, when we have debates around strikers and kind of, why don't Norwich get a third striker or a fourth striker or even a second striker at times? It's tough, because if you have a player that doesn't get football, you kind of end up with Adam Eder, who is 20, you have to help me in terms of age. He's 20, 23, 24. And maybe, but actually in terms of footballing age, he's about 21, 20. Exactly, because he hasn't had the games and he hasn't had the experience. And I think you can see that in the way that he plays. He's still quite raw in terms of his maybe not quite knowing how to utilize that powerful body he's got. Compare that to someone like Josh Sargent, who is 25, a year older, and look how much more polished he is just because he's had a bigger volume of games, even though majority of that has come on the wing. So this again, just to feed it into sort of a Norwich City angle, is maybe why, and I know we've had plenty of discussions, particularly when Temu Pukki was here, but also with Josh Sargent as well, why it's not always easy to just go and get a striker, and that's why they were conscious of signing Antti Sienats when they did, because of that dual role that he could do. And likewise, Mateus Christgård, and the fact he can play a multitude of positions is positive. Even someone like Jovan Makama as well, because it's about their development. And if not, you can get stuck in this halfway house that I think Adam Eder has got to the detriment of his development. So yeah, Norwich won't see any money off that if he's gone for the figures that are there. We'll obviously chase that in the coming days. But yeah, if Norwich have got sell-ons from Rowe, from Matos, and from Kamara, which I don't think is beyond the realms, then that's a positive windfall that they would have got from absolutely nothing that they've done at all. So that's really good business.
Yeah, definitely. And just before we come to sort of our general reflections on the window as it comes to an end, a couple more names who I'll get your verdicts on. One who I saw in the comments a little bit earlier, I won't be able to find it, but he's also been named quite a lot on social media. And a little while ago, I think there were some rumours going around that maybe George Earthy at West Ham would be someone who Norwich were interested in. But you provided an update on our transfer deadline day live blog, which to anyone who hasn't been on that, I'd obviously recommend for around the next 12 minutes that it's still relevant for. But yeah, obviously you provided an update. So anyone who hasn't seen that, tell us what that is on George Earthy.
Yeah, I'm sorry to kill the mood and the vibe, which to be fair, we probably did right at the start, right? When we outlined where things were and weren't expecting anything senior addition or incoming or outgoing wise. I think that was probably finalised with Nunez and Maatsen. So therein is the answer, really. George Earthy, not a player who's coming to Carrow Road in the next 10 minutes. Which, I understand the links. He was with Liam Manning last year. He played 40 times. Only 11 of those were starts. I think one of his starts came at Carrow Road. Actually, I remember Liam Manning post match really. Selecting him for praise, because I think he played him in a bit of a wing-back role that he hadn't played in typically, and I think he was part of the solution to stopping Borja Sainz, and he was good that night. And I actually remember watching George Earthy in a youth game for West Ham against Norwich, and he was a real standout as an attacking midfielder that day. That would have been a couple of years ago now. So yeah, he's a good player, but he's not one that is coming to Norwich City in the next 10 minutes. So not to channel the thought, a chief executive who was once of these parts, but and it's very early to do. It's not like we're saying at 11 o'clock at night, but yeah, if you wanted to go to bed now, I think you could do that pretty comfortably and make sure that you woke up in the morning to that you didn't miss much beyond, as we said, maybe Dan Barden going to Dagenham and Redbridge and Manchester United's Zach Bauman being close, if they've been able to get that over the line. I'll see if I can get an update on that whilst you're talking, Sam.
Indeed, and I've just checked the club website, so it hasn't been officially confirmed. But yeah, Connor, if you can try to find out about Zach Bauman, because we've got Ryan Moody and a few others discussing Zach Bauman and whether he's going to be joining the club. Our understanding is that the deal is agreed. It's all good to go. It's just about now pushing it through before that 7 p.m. deadline. Norwich do like him. We don't think there would be a fee involved, but there would be some clauses almost similar to that Alex Matos deal that we spoke about earlier. He was quite a big part of Manchester United's under-18s and their under-18 Premier League success last season. So in terms of calibre, quite an exciting one. I can't confess to having ever watched him before in my life, but when you look at the calibre, it's certainly an encouraging one. For me and Connor, it does feel like actually, for all of the focus that's been on the first team, and we'll come on to those 12 senior signings next, but just before that, probably what's gone on under the radar a little bit, and Ben Napper did speak about doing it before the summer, is the fact that they've almost completely overhauled that kind of under 18, under 21 setup. Clearly something that they felt needed work, and just like the first team, really, that's something they've set about this summer, and it feels like Bauman will be the latest part of that.
Yeah, and it needed it as well. When you looked at the academy groups at the end of last season, they'd lost a lot of bodies in there just through sort of the natural churn of development cycles. So they needed to do that at 18 level and at 21 level. I think there's probably an element as well. Dean Rastrick, who's been in the post a year, I think, from memory. I think he's beginning to probably want to put his stamp on what those groups and age groups look like. And yeah, we've seen it as much as we talk about kind of goalkeeping levels at at first team level. That's been the case at kind of under 21s level. Caleb Anson's still in the building. Goalkeepers are a bit different because obviously there are opportunities during a season where kind of emergency loan slots pop up. So that wouldn't surprise me again if we got into October, November, and there's a League One, League Two, National League team that need a goalkeeper. If Caleb Anson could go in and fit that bill, because he had a really productive spell at Altrincham last season. I remember speaking to Mark Tierney about him, and he, absolutely raved about the type of character he was and his performances, even though he didn't play too many games in the end. So that's a bit different. But yeah, I mean, some of the players they've added: Luke Towler from Ipswich, Glenn McCourt from Derry, who was, there was some Premier League clubs in for him at one stage. There's a lot there that they've done and that they like. So that's, again, maybe an underrated element. Obviously, Amin from Swindon was a good get as well. There was serious interest in him, and they've committed a decent sum of money to bringing him to Carrow Road. So yeah, those are the bits that probably go under the radar. And look, some of these players, as we know, you'll never see, and we'll never see play a senior game, and probably won't ever push their way up. But if there's one or two, and we've just spoken about the players that they've got windfall on, those three were academy graduates. So if you can get one or two or three, that can be very lucrative in terms of the player trading model that Norwich City want to do. So, yeah, I think that's, like you say, been a really underrated element of their business, and that under 21 squad is looking quite interesting. I think I'm not sure at the moment that we look at it and say there's a real standout, but again, as a group, that looks pretty interesting, I would say. And I've just checked on Bauman and Barden. I've got no update at the moment with 7 minutes to go. So we'll see what happens in the next few minutes.
Yeah, definitely. And of course that, with deal sheets, etc., that could drag on. So it gives fresh life to the live blog as even as the deadline approaches with a few minutes left of that one. So yeah, Bauman and Barden, the ones to kind of look out for. But just to see us home for that 7 p.m. deadline, I just wanted to sort of get your general reflections on the transfer window, Connor, because when we went into it, I think everyone was saying it was a big summer, not necessarily just in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. Now, I think Ben Napper will be looking back at it, hoping that he's delivered both. I think it's maybe too early to say definitively whether Norwich have delivered the sort of team exactly that they want to deliver, and ultimately the outcome of the season will be the only thing that can tell us that. But certainly they've got through their fair share of scouting, of negotiations, of agreements, medicals, deals, confirmations. It's been a very, very busy summer, both in terms of ins and outs. Obviously, some senior players leaving right at the start of it, at the end of their contracts as well. Borja Sainz leaving for Porto for 14.25 million. A deal with Marcelino Nunez that nobody is going to forget probably for the next few decades. Keeping Josh Sargent in the building. It's been an awfully busy summer. Connor, what are your general reflections when you look back on the body of work that Ben Napper has produced over the last few months?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting, isn't it? You have that initial feeling, and then probably it ages. I think, if we'd have done this video after the 22, was it 22, 20? No,
21, 22. Yeah, I thought the business was incredible.
Exactly. And I think we all did when you looked at Ozan Kabak and Billy Gilmore. I think initially it was, wow, what a chance they've got here. Milo Rashica to go and attack the Premier League. And actually 6 months later, it was pretty turgid, wasn't it? And pretty dismal, kind of the fact that and Pierre-Lise Malou, that zero of them were able to make an impact. So again, it's one that ultimately we will see with time. It's I think it's difficult to sit here and not feel optimistic and not feel infused about what they've done, with the knowledge, of course, that they won't get everything right. There'll be players in this group that they've brought in of 12 that won't be a success and won't hit the ground running, because that's just the nature of the way recruitment works. And you can do all your due diligence and look at all the stats and data that you want, and ultimately some you get wrong. But ultimately for Norwich, it's about getting more right. And I think we've seen, in the early weeks, Vladan Kovacevic, I think he's showing signs that, he's mad. I quite like how mad he is, but he's shown signs that he'll at least be capable at championship level. And you look at his performances at Portsmouth and at Blackburn and the contributions that he's made, they've been game defining. I think we're seeing stuff from Jakov Medic, certainly on Saturday and against Portsmouth again, that there's evidence there that maybe in the right structure, system, style, he could be really beneficial. Mirko Topic, I think in the 4 games has really grown. Chris Gordon, we've not seen much of, but I think what we have seen is really high quality flashes. So if they can get 5, 6, 7 of those guys who get themselves to be really important, integral members of this squad that blend, add a balance, that get this team competitive, it will be a successful window, because that's kind of all you need as a hit rate on them. And clearly there's some risks within that as well. I think Harry Darling looks absolutely incredible as a bit of business. And I said to you on Saturday that the biggest compliment you can give to him is, look, he looks like he's played 300 games for Norwich. Yeah. He doesn't look like someone who's just come in, is adapting to life. I feel like I've been watching him play for 5 years. So I think there's some really good stuff that they've done, but ultimately, I think in 6 months, January, end of the season, we will be able to say for sure whether or not this has been a good window or a bad window. But Ben Knapp has done his work. He said he'd overhaul the squads. He said he'd arm Norwich City's head coach to go and attack the Championship. Josh Sargent's still in the building. It's up to Liam Manning now, isn't it, to try and get this team, a tune out of this team, to get them going and to get them progressing on their Championship form and get them ultimately closer to the top 6. That is going to be the ultimate judge of their transfer business. But if you said to me, Norwich will keep Josh Sargent, obviously with the knowledge that we have on some of the new signings, I think it's difficult to sit here right now, even with losing Sainz, losing Nunez, and in that initial kind of assessment, to feel that it's anything other than a success. And hopefully now that plays out over the next 3, 4, 5 months as we head closer and deeper into that Championship window. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, I think generally, again, it's kind of positive, but I'm just the same as you. I think that that summer of 2021 has burned me to the extent that I can't ever again say that it's been a successful summer for Norwich City. Certainly in terms of the quality of player who they've brought in, and that's no slight on anyone they've signed. I just think it is too early, but what you can probably credit them for is the amount that they've got through. And I know for those of us who have played a lot of FIFA and Football Manager, it feels like signing 12 players in a summer isn't the most difficult thing. But I think getting through that amount of work is huge, and also probably really important for Ben Napper, because ultimately now he's got his own head coach. It must be almost his own squad of players. There are obviously a few who have been there for a while, but the large majority now have been signed by Ben Napper with his project in mind. So there are no excuses, which is one thing, but also everything should ultimately be kind of pulling in the same direction now. And I think although we can't 100% tell the quality of the signings on the pitch, I think the fact that they've managed to get to that position with just 2 or 3 windows is really, really important for them, and probably shows some really positive signs. And I'm looking forward to seeing how they deliver on the pitch. Now, the good news is that it's gone 7 o'clock. Josh Sargent is a Norwich City player, and barring probably a little bit of work over the next couple of hours, everyone can go back to relaxing a little bit on the transfer front. Obviously, still some bits hanging over in terms of that interest in Shane Duffy and Anis Ben Slimane from Turkey. A couple of other things that probably could get done around the edges. But for a kind of underwhelming deadline day, I think overall news-wise, it hasn't been a short one for Norwich City. And as Jeffman rounds us off with, keeping Sarge is just about the best bit of business Norwich could do this window. He's very happy. I'm sure lots of Norwich fans are, although I will decline his offer to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning just for the laughs, because I'm still harrowed by that experience we had back in 2023. And thank you very much. I'd like to finish saying thank you very much to whoever at the EFL or the FA has decided that the deadline should be brought back to 7 p.m. rather than 11. So lovely early nights for me and Connor. Connor, thanks very much for joining me for this deadline day live stream. Anyone who wants more coverage can, of course, go to pinker.com/subscribe. Even though deadline day has been and gone, I think we're still running, unless I'm making a mistake here, I'm pretty sure we're still running an offer of £18 for the year, or £6 for 6 whole months of Norwich City coverage. So in our biased opinion, I'm sure we'd both recommend going to pinker.com/subscribe and taking advantage of that deal while you still can. Thanks very much for consuming all of our coverage across the transfer.
Sorry, Sam.
I'll let Connor interrupt.
I was just going to jump just to say just to echo what you've said there, and just say a thank you to everyone who over what has been a busy summer. Look, I'll be honest, I don't really enjoy transfer windows. I'm really looking forward to kind of getting stuck into a really good run of football matches to talk about, because ultimately that's why I think we do what we do, because we want to cover football matches and whatnot. But look, thank you to everybody who obviously has watched, read, tuned in for any of our coverage over what's been a really busy summer. 12 signings, lots of outs as well. We've tried to sort of cover everything, and as always, and probably like Norwich City will in this window, you don't get everything right, but hopefully we've been good value in that. So yeah, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Me and Sam are off to go and sleep for about 12 hours now. That's the plan.
Absolutely. I might sleep for even longer than 12 hours. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you very soon.